Hello. Jo Walton is undoubtedly the most celebrated writer of science fiction and fantasy of her generation. Over the last 25 years, she has written well over a dozen novels, which have collectively won her the Hugo, the Nebula, the Mythopoeic Award, the Locus Award, the Otherwise Award, the Prometheus Award, the Astounding Award, the Skylark Award, the British Fantasy Award, and the World Fantasy Award, not to mention a slew of other nominations. But she never rests on her laurels, for each of her books is radically different from the last, ping-ponging from epic fantasy to alternate history to dragon romance to magical realism to historical thriller to metafiction and beyond. As such, she has one of the most diverse bibliographies of any modern genre writer, not to mention her wealth of essays and blog posts about the history of fantasy and science fiction. I just finished Lent, her heady theological time loop novel about a controversial Renaissance preacher, Girolamo Savonarola, and it is immediately one of my top reads of 2026. Ada Palmer is a tenured historian at the University of Chicago, specializing in the Italian Renaissance and the wider history of ideas. She is renowned and beloved amongst her students for arranging a complex role play every school year that simulates the infamous papal election of 1492. She is a musician performing with the a cappella group Sassafras and wrote a complete choral reinterpolation of Norse mythology. She founded Tezukainenglish.com, a fan site dedicated to the proliferation of Osamu Tezuka's work in the Anglosphere and a key resource in my own manga hipsterdom today. She is an activist who fights for wider recognition of chronic pain and other invisible disabilities. In 2016, she published her debut novel, Too Like the Lightning, the first volume of her Terra Ignota tetralogy. This hyper-ambitious, sprawling tapestry of philosophically dense science fiction is my single favorite work of contemporary sci-fi. I'm a huge fan of both Jo Walton and Ada Palmer, and I ranked books from each of them very high in my favorite reads of 2025. Their literary careers have long been intertwined, and years of mutual friendship and support blossomed into the podcast about science fiction and fantasy that they host together, entitled Ex Urbe ad Astra. And now, their friendship has led to yet another collaboration, the essay collection Trace Elements: Conversations on the Project of Science Fiction and Fantasy, published by Macmillan. To discuss their book and other topics of genre literature, they have joined me today. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hello, lovely to be here.
Was that spiel too long? I'm like, I have to include every. I got to cover all the bases. You're just both very accomplished people.
It's fun to hear it, and it's fun to hear what people pick and choose and highlight and how they phrase it. So always fun. Thank you for having us. This
Yeah,
is
of
a book
course.
that is itself a conversation, so it's extra fun to have conversations about it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
that's very much the case.
I noticed that something you bring up in the book a lot is the idea that this isn't meant to be a capping stone of any sort, right? This is just something that is meant to spur conversation, and hopefully it'll get more people talking about sci-fi and fantasy. I know for me personally, a lot of the terms and topics you talk about has given me a lot of tools to discuss genre fiction in the future, like the idea of, like imprint versus external science fiction, or the idea of genre as furniture, right?
Hmm.
I mean, that's one of the things that we were hoping for, was that we would define these terms and talk about them, and that they would be useful for other people so that other people could build on those using these tools.
Yeah, yeah. The term imprint SF especially, which we use to talk about SF that comes out from a science fiction press or in a science fiction magazine, written by people who read science fiction for people who read
Yeah.
science fiction in an ongoing conversation, in contrast with when mainstream authors who have a mainstream literary background and mostly read mainstream literature choose to write something which has the furniture of science fiction in it, like a time traveler or an alien, but doesn't use the tools and isn't responding to the internal conversation of imprint SF,
Yeah.
is a difference that, Many times I've been in a conversation where people say, I read this book and it's science fiction, but it feels weird. Why does it feel weird? And often that's the answer to the question. What are these two categories of SF coming from this long conversation and SF coming from outside of it, but bringing in new stuff, bringing in elements from different genres and different practices, often very stimulating, but palpably different. And to be able to give a name to that palpable difference.
Sort of like Kazuo Ishiguro writing like Never Let Me Go
Never
or
Let
The
Me
Very
Go is
Giant.
Never Let Me Go is actually a very interesting example because Ishiguro had written historical fiction in addition to mainstream fiction. He'd written several things that are historical fiction, actually. And he does read science fiction. So Never Let Me Go is more science fictional than most external SF, but nevertheless is not really part of the conversation. It's a great book. I love it. I really like Never Let Me Go. But it's interestingly poised in a particular place.
Yeah, on the edge between imprint and
Yeah,
external SF.
yeah.
Yes, and
But
I kind of remember.
honestly, if he'd sat down with any one of us, we could have fixed all the things that are wrong with that book in 10 minutes, and then it would be a much better book.
Yeah, and I think kind of part of the reason why he gets into conflict with Le Guin is he's sort of insisting. I think it's Buried Giant, right? Where he's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, this isn't really a fantasy novel," and she's like, "Shut up. It is a fantasy novel." And
What?
like it might not be engaging with the history of fantasy as much as Imprint fantasy, but you are writing fantasy.
Yeah, her beautiful line that he's like somebody falling off a tightrope, shouting, "I hope nobody will think I'm a tightrope walker."
And
Because
then
he says,
that's
"I hope nobody will think I'm a fantasy writer."
and that's also the constant the conflict with Margaret Atwood, right? Is that she's also like, I'm not writing science fiction, and then you look at Oryx and Crate, and you're like, this is most definitely science fiction.
Well, except that that's one of the great spaces where we can say it's using furniture of SF. It's using
Hmm.
elements of SF, but it's not using many other elements of SF that it doesn't share. And when we define a genre by its furniture, right, we say, does it have rocket ships? Therefore,
Yeah.
it's science fiction. We can lose the characteristics that make something palpably feel like SF. And one of the essays in the collection talks about how we associate dystopian literature with SF.
Hmm.
And often dystopian literature involves some element of speculative technology. Orwell's view screens
Yeah.
are at the time a speculative technology. But all the major urtext of dystopia, the ones that are shapers of the genre that people think of when they define what is dystopia, were not written by science fiction readers. They were written by
Of
mainstream
course.
authors who wrote this one book with the furniture of SF in it. This is true of 1984. This is true of Brave New World. This is true of Semyatin's We. This is true of Handmaid's Tale. This is, in its complex way, true of Hunger Games. And that raises the fun question, is dystopia a science fictional genre? Now, there is lots of dystopia also written by science fiction writers within Imprint SF, but none of them is the shaper maker of that genre. They're usually responding to it, and some of them are responding very sophisticatedly, like The Dispossessed or Trouble on Triton.
Yeah.
Others are, reiterating, let's have a fun dystopia and then blow it up. But the genre originates from outside SF. And then as SF adopts and works with it.
Yeah.
But whenever it renews itself, the new transformative urtext is always from outside, not inside.
That's also why that is one of the science fiction genres that mainstream writers do best, because it's coming from mainstream tropes and mainstream ideas and shapes.
Mm.
So Marge Piercy's Woman on the Edge of Time,
Mm.
and also Never Let Me Go, which is a dystopia if anything ever was, where they are dystopian or utopian, they work really well. And where they're trying to use science fictional techniques that they're not as familiar with how they work. They work less well. So Piercy's He, She, and It, British title, Body of Glass, which I always think of first because that's how I first read it out of the library. But anyway, that book, which is trying to be straight cyberpunk set in the future science fiction, Piercy is much less successful with than she is with Woman on the Edge of Time, which is a dystopia, because dystopia works better with this. But we wanted to use these terms, imprint SF and external SF, because we're not saying it's not science fiction when somebody from outside the genre writes it. We just want to have a way that doesn't sound negative to
Yes.
say this is a different thing. This is an interesting thing. This is somebody stepping into the genre and doing a thing, rather than somebody within the genre doing something that's part of the conversation. So we tried to make those terms sound neutral, because people will sometimes use the word mundane to mean people from outside the genre, which
Sure.
sounds negative even when it isn't intended that way.
Yeah. Well, a question I have, this is just a very general question when it comes to a collaboration such as this book. I think this is technically Jo's third essay collection, right? After Informal History of the Hugos, as well as What Makes This Book Great. So this book is a collection of essays that both of you have co-written together, as well as various essays that you have written on your lonesome, which neatly fits into the wider project of the book. And so I guess my question is, what was the process of crafting these co-written essays? Like, are you going back and forth? I tried to distinguish who wrote each section. Sometimes it's very obvious, like the extended sidebar in the first essay about Jacques the Fatalist, and I'm like, okay, this is the Ada paragraph,
Oh,
right?
really?
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yep. We love a lot of the same books. So a lot of the co-written essays, one of us wrote a beginning, gave it to the other added paragraphs and expanded, and then it went back and forth. And often, I would have the beginning of an idea and I would have 3 examples of it, and then I would give it to Jo, and Jo would put in 8 more examples of it. And then Jo would expand a thesis briefly, and then I would nuance and expand that thesis so that it had more robustness, and they would just go back and forth and grow very organically each time.
Yeah, and sometimes we would do this where we would write some of an essay, and when we were getting tired or stuck, we'd hand it over to the other one, and the other one would write some more, and then likewise pass it back when they were getting tired of it. And so we would come to it fresh and excited to write some more and rework the earlier part. So most of the ones that have got both of our names on, you can't actually tell who wrote which paragraph, because we both wrote.
Right, because the answer is somebody wrote the first draft of that paragraph, and then the other person expanded individual sentences and inserted individual phrases to it, so that every paragraph, no matter which of us originated that paragraph, was then expanded and nuanced by the other.
And some of the essays, you can actually kind of see this because they started off as pretty short things that I wrote on Tor.com years ago. And then we took that nub of my little short thing and expanded it together, one at a time, passing it to and fro, into the nuanced, longer, much more interesting essay that's in the book. And so even some of the things that have just got my name on, like the Why I Read essay, it has still had a big hand in the way that is shaped in the book, compared to the, I think it was 4 little essays that I made that out of.
Oh, sure.
And I revised it a lot, but also Ada revised that, but not enough that it felt like we would put both of our names on it.
Particularly because that one is so first person.
Yeah,
it's
it
an
is
expression of your experience and your thoughts of reading.
Yes, it's about Jo's reading habits specifically, not Ada's.
Yep.
Yeah. yeah. But very, very much we both worked on most of the things that are in there. And even the some of the things that just have your name on, I worked on too. Yeah.
And I would say, hey Joe, I need more examples of this thing.
So
I would always add them.
Who else did this particular thing? And I will always have things to do it. Yeah. Ada once said that every science fiction panel at a convention ought to have me on text so that they could have examples.
Yeah, you can imagine Joe in a sort of panopticon with videos of all of them in a headset, and then bip in and be like, the example of that is this, and the date was that, which would be really fun.
Yeah. I said on Blue Sky that Ada has lots of good ideas, and I've read a lot. Oh no, what I said was you're an intellectual historian, and I've read a lot of books. So that's my qualification.
But that makes it such a winning combo, you know? It's like peanut butter and chocolate. I would say that one of the highlights of your collection is the extended section in the middle discussing chronic pain, which has long affected both of your lives and influenced your respective work. The interweaving of Ada's blog posts and memoirs with Jo's poetry was extraordinarily affecting to me. One of the dominant trends in genre literature for the last decade has been an increased demand and supply of diverse viewpoints and experiences, right? Especially regarding race, sexuality, neurodiversity, and so forth. Nevertheless, in modern fantasy and science fiction, the representation of chronic pain and disability as a whole is shockingly limited. In your reading experience, are there any works of genre literature that have done a good job of representing chronic pain and disability? And how do you think authors seeking to achieve due diligence on these topics should be approaching them?
I mean, that last one is very hard to answer, the due diligence. It's very difficult to answer that. You can find people who have those conditions and talk to them. You can find them where they are talking on their own blogs or in their own voices, in a lot of them, not just one person, and go for that. That's what I do when I'm writing a disability that I don't know about. As for who's done it well, Lois McMaster Bujold's Miles Vorkosigan books, I think, deal very well with a chronic and degenerative condition with Miles. There are some problems, but I think she does it extremely well generally. And it really feels real. But when I wrote a person who has my disabilities in, among others, I wasn't actually expecting the sort of positive response that I got and the kind of own voices response that I got where people felt represented. Because I'd not written about it before. And unlike Ada, I'm not an activist. I am disabled, but I'm not out there. I don't feel like it's an interesting thing about me. I don't think it's a thing that I want to spend more time thinking about and working on than I have to.
Because it sucks.
It sucks. Yeah. Very hard for me to be positive about it. It just sucks.
Well, and I think a big part of why I do disability activism is that I'm a teacher.
Right.
And I'm very aware how much of a difference it makes to my students in the classroom to make them aware of it. To let them have a conversation with a role model figure who to them is in a position of both power and success, who then also has this challenge. And it's out of the experiences and rhetoric that I've used when dealing with it as a teacher that my online presence addressing it has also developed.
Whereas I felt at the beginning of my career that if I made a big deal out of it, if I made a big deal out of it at all, it would be the only thing anybody did ever talk to me about. That I would get pigeonholed as just that, and that I wouldn't get invited to do things that I wanted to do and talk about things I was interested in talking about, and I would only be talking about that. So I do actually have quite a lot of disability in quite a lot of my books, but it's just quietly there as a thing.
Yeah. Well, and that's similar to how this this discussion is just hidden in the middle, right, of a book that is
Yes.
otherwise entirely about science fiction and fantasy. Because one of the most important types of representation activism is talking about a marginalized group in a normal context as if that's a perfectly normal thing to do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Because there is a ghettoization of, you know, this happens a lot in history. For example, I work on Renaissance humanism, and there's a bunch of books about Renaissance female scholars. And they're only written by gender studies people, and only gender studies people read them. And when I go to the Renaissance Society of America conference, they're over in the corner having their mini conference that only they go to. And the normal scholars who are working on humanism never go to those panels and never read those books. But if I write a book about Renaissance humanism and I discuss some women alongside the men and don't draw attention to it and just normalize it and say, of course, we're talking about these 15 scholars. 3 of these 15 scholars are female scholars. That is just the case. And I treat it as normal. It reaches a different audience. And in the same way that, you know, first wave, second wave, third wave feminism have different power. We're at a moment in which there's a lot of literature now which is focusing on the identity group. And here's a queer book, and here's a disability book, and here's a gender atypical book, and here's a trans book. And that has great power, but so does, here is a big ideas SF book. It has a character who's disabled in it. It would never be on the cover or the back blurb, but it's just normal because disabled people existing is normal. And it has a trans character because trans people existing is normal. And it has queer people because queer people existing is normal. That has a different persuasive power, and it reaches a different and larger audience that kind of needs it more than the preaching to the choir of a book where it's on the front. And that's one of the reasons Jo and I decided, hey, let's write a book about science fiction. And then these are our essays. We're also portraying ourselves as people. Let's put the disability section quietly in the middle, not on the cover, not in the title, not forefronting its existence, because then people who would never have picked up a disability memoir will experience a disability memoir and connect with it. And
I didn't have a disability essay, and Ada had these 2 terrific pieces that we wanted to include. And then when we were talking about it, we realized that I did have a lot of disability and pain poetry. And that if we put those with the piece that they're in, that made both parts more powerful. And also that my disability poetry that's in the book was written between 2003 and 2023, which is when we compiled the book. So that is actually 20 years of writing poetry about pain and living with disability, which in itself makes a point, right?
That it doesn't go away, it doesn't get cured, and it doesn't suck less. It sucks exactly the same amount.
It just gets more boring as it goes on with time. Yeah, and I think that in itself makes a sort of interesting point about that without actually coming out and saying that. Just the fact that the first of the poems that are in there is from 2003. And by 2003, I'd already published 3 novels. It's not like it's Juvenilia.
Though on the topic of Juvenilia, in your respective, you both have essays about how you end up becoming published for the first time. And let's see, in your respective essays about your paths towards authorship, you both mention unpublished but completed novels that you wrote prior to your debut works. For superstar authors like Stephen King and Brandon Sanderson, there is a significant demand for their early trunked novels to be polished and released to the wider public. Have you ever considered going back to your own early works and repurposing their content for future novels, either partially or in full? Now, Jo, I think you might have actually released your original novel as an ebook, but I'm not sure if it's on the internet anymore.
It's not an ebook. I put it on my LiveJournal a long time ago, and it's still floating around the internet.
But you have to dig for it.
Yeah, I never properly made it an ebook or tried to sell it or anything. I just put it up so that people could read it during a spat where some people were saying nobody should put work online for free.
Hmm.
Um,
Oh, sure. Back in the like
and
late 2000s, right?
yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I just put it up during that, and there's still copies of it bumping around. But I mean, this is in the essay, but when I submitted that to Patrick Nielsen Hayden at Tor, he said, this is the kind of book that people write when they're going to write good things later. Don't try to fix it, write something else. And I took that advice,
Hmm.
and I still don't think that fixing it would necessarily be productive. Though there
Yes.
is one thing in it that I might use for something else, cannibalize for something completely different. Nobody will notice if I do this, even if they read it. Whereas Ada's are quite different.
Yeah, so I mean, I have Terra Ignota is Too Like the Lightning is the fifth novel that I wrote,
Mm.
and of the earlier ones, the first one is a really good world build and a really good story, and I do intend someday to go back and rewrite it. Probably much tighter. I had imagined it as 4 books. It probably just needs to be 2. Um, but still using the same world build, which is great, and still using the same characters and details, just with better sentences and better paragraphs,
Sure.
telling the same story. The second one, um, I used most of the powerful concepts and issues that were at stake in it later in Terra Ignota. So
Mm.
if I were to return to it, much of what was exciting within it, I've done better later.
Yeah, you've
And so I
already
don't know if
ripped the
it's
guts
worth
out.
returning to that one, even though, as written, except for the beginning, it's better
Mm.
than the other one. But the other one is more worth going to. And then the third one was kind of light. I don't think I would return to it. I have more serious stuff to do, but it's neat. The fourth one, similar. It was sort of my could I write YA experiment. It has really cool POV. I might return to it at some point. If I do return to it, I would probably write it as a single book instead of the 2 books that it had imagined it as, right? So each of them has unique different, well, one of them I wanted to harvest the best stuff from, or already did harvest the best stuff from. One of them absolutely on my list to do. The other 2 optional projects in my copious spare time.
I would really love if you wrote a YA novel or series with the density of Terra Ignota.
It
Just
wouldn't,
like,
well, that's the thing. Then it wouldn't be YA. One of the things
oh,
YA
sure.
has is quite a strict formula about the level of density, the
Yeah,
breadth of density that's allowed.
because it is for young people.
Hmm.
I mean, the whole idea of YA is a certain
Yeah.
smoothness of reading.
Mm.
Which is not to say that I wasn't reading incredibly dense things when I was that age, but
Well, and
nevertheless,
adults sometimes enjoy reading
absolutely, yeah.
those smoother things.
YA as a genre is its own thing, separate from the intended reader.
But that story has a plot which could be a YA plot, but a point of view from a narrator who's narrating it from a different hypostasis of reality. It is not a YA capable narration structure, but the narration structure is at the heart of the story. So it needs to be told, even if by a just summary of events, you would say that could be a YA plot.
Yeah.
It
Hmm.
can't be a YA book because it can't work with a ordinary POV, or at least it wouldn't excite me. It needs the POV it has.
Mm. So my next question is aimed more towards Ada, but if I aim questions towards one or the other, I would love
They
anyone to
ricochet.
jump in. But a constant theme of your appreciation for anime is that due to different cultural assumptions between Japanese and Western society, Japanese science fiction often uses unique themes and trope formulations that are totally unknown within the traditional parameters of Western sci-fi. One of my favorite aspects of Terra Ignota is how you elaborately smuggled in tropes from Mobile Suit Gundam into the later volumes. So what are other examples of your favorite Japan exclusive genre tropes that you think Western science fiction and fantasy should try to integrate?
Well, importantly to start, I do not believe it's the case that Japan is especially more unique than all the other language and culture groups out there
Oh,
that are
sure.
in sci-fi traditions. This is important to get across to the viewer, right? It's just that it's the one that, because so much of it is being translated, we have access to. And
Yes.
because anime and manga are popular, many of which are SF, huge amounts of Japanese SF and fantasy are translated into English compared to how much Francophone SF or Brazilian or Portuguese SF or Chinese SF or Finnish SF or anything else is translated. So we have more access. And one of the challenges that SF faces as a genre, and that all Anglophone genres face, is that masses of stuff are translated out of English because it's a hegemonic language into every other language in the
Hmm.
world. And
Yes.
then people in all those other languages read it, write cool things in response, which never get translated back. And so we have a one-way conversation almost always. And Japanese is the one where it's closer to being two-way. And you see the influence of this in work far beyond mine. In mine, it's more visible, partly because I dive deep in anime and manga, and you see influences of nerdier anime and manga things like Gundam, and older ones like Tezuka's work and the influences
Hmm.
of and references to Phoenix and Astro Boy. But one thing that there's an essay on, for example, is how the robot fiction tradition in Japan was very different from the robot fiction tradition in the Anglosphere for a long time, because Anglophone robot fiction in Golden Age SF and its immediate aftermath usually used robots to explore anxiety about labor uprisings and slave rebellions. And the
Hmm.
robot was a cipher for and stand-in for anxiety about oppressed laboring classes upon which the other class depends for
Always
labor.
the idea of a
Rising.
robot apocalypse,
Right.
right?
And so, what are robot laws in English? It's the laws you program into a robot to prevent the robot rebellion. Uh, in Japan, a completely inverse way of looking at robots and what they represented develops out of Tezuka's Astro Boy, in which the robot is a proxy for the oppressed groups targeted
Hmm.
by fascist genocidal things in World War II, and are used by Osamu Tezuka and others early on to explore racism in a culture whose censorship practices and taboos would not allow direct discussion of racism or direct
Hmm.
discussion of fascism after the war when there was a lot of censorship. But you could write a story where a dictator called Hitlini is trying to purge all of the robot citizens from his country, and in which Astro Boy travels to the US to meet with Black activists to learn how to organize a civil rights movement and face KKK robe wearing anti-robot hate groups to explore this, so that birthed a tradition in Japanese SF where we identify strongly with the robot. The robot is
Hmm.
oppressed minority group with whom we have a duty to have empathy. And when you say robot laws in Japanese, you mean the Robot Civil Rights Act passed in
Yes.
Astro Boy to give robots freedom, ban owning and trading them like chattel, and give them the right to vote, which is exactly the opposite of what robot laws means in English. And
Hmm.
in the 1990s and early 2000s, there was very little robot fiction written in English. There was a period of
Yeah.
paucity. There was much more interest in cyberpunk and cyber intelligence, very little about robots,
Sure.
about 2 decades, partly because improvements in the way we think about equality meant that people didn't want to tell these stories about anxiety of the laboring classes. Laboring classes are important, need to be empowered. Didn't want to tell stories about scary slave rebellions, but about the importance of empathy. As
Hmm.
more Japanese SF was translated into English, and a new way of using robots to explore something that we still love instead of something that we find politically uncomfortable, there's now a blossoming of new robot fiction again as of the 20 teens,
Hmm.
written by people influenced by Japanese stuff coming in. And that's an example where a trope went, changed, came back, has changed us, and is going out again. And robots now mean all sorts of new exciting things, and we're having a new renaissance of robot fiction.
Yeah. And it's interesting that, of course, now we're also seeing a proliferation of AI fiction. And how does AI fiction differentiate from robot fiction,
Yeah. Well, and the
as traditionally
propagandistic
written?
stealing of the word AI to mean a thing that isn't at all what
Yeah,
AI has
so well,
been in the
exactly. It's
tradition of the
like we
genre.
shouldn't it's unfortunate to conflate AI with the
Yep.
large language models that are just kind of ruining all of
Yeah,
society.
and even ruining the word. One of the first reviews of the collection had somebody said, "I did a double take, and it took me a moment to realize they were using AI the old way
Oh,
when they talked
Yeah,
about AI in the book, because the book was written before that word was being used for machine learning, Gen
yeah.
AI, LLM stuff." And is sort of squatting on the word so that the word is ambiguous. I have
Mhm.
drifted toward just using the word cyber intelligences when I'm trying to talk about
Mm.
what I used to use the word AI for. Our degree of empathy with and so on,
Hmm.
civil rights questions of cyber intelligences, because I think that makes clear what we're trying to talk about as opposed to LLMs and Gen AI algorithmic machine learning things, which are not yet and are not likely to become cyber intelligences. Other parallel technologies may, but what's that wonderful Cory Doctorow phrase? An LLM is not going to become a cyber intelligence. That's like thinking you can breed faster and faster horses, and one of them will give birth to a locomotive. But other technologies based on machine learning, the larger
Yeah,
category within which LLMs are an example, are exciting
yeah.
technology.
I hate being opposed to AI
Mm.
because I've wanted AI all my life, but this is not
Yes.
not what
Study
I
the history of
wanted.
AI rights movements. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
On the topic of empathies, there is a great essay towards the end about how the empathies of science fiction, and you've mentioned this a couple of times already in this call, but how the empathies of science fiction keep expanding, right? It's like how, robots were once completely othered, and now they're kind of like considered people, and aliens are completely othered, and now they're kind of considered people, and basically the groups of that readers can empathize with has just naturally blossomed over the last century due to the effect of science fiction as just a tool of um I don't want to say empathy again. I'm going to say empathy again.
Science fiction and fantasy,
Yeah,
both,
Yes,
right?
and
yeah.
fantasy. And so
Um,
I guess my question is, what do you think there is a big new frontier of um of like some sort of trying to think of how to phrase this, is there some sort of like group that hasn't been empathized with in genre fiction yet that you think is still on the horizon?
so I think we're constantly seeing new things be explored, and
Hmm.
an important factor about humanity is that we will need to constantly always be still expanding our empathy sphere. And one tiny background detail in Terra Ignota is we hear a little bit about the history of the octopus rights movement.
Right. And Ray Naylor's Kingdom of the Sea, which has been written since, is very empathetic to
Yeah,
octopodes.
it is an octopus rights movement
Yeah, it basically,
book
well,
in a way.
sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
And Adrian Tchaikovsky's Children of Time is doing spiders and
With its
ants.
spiders, yes.
Let's have empathy with spiders, you know. Uh, so but you can draw a direct line from Black Beauty to Children of Time,
Hmm.
or widening empathy sphere with animals,
Mhm.
and the same with octopuses. And I think that if we could see the thing that was being excluded, that we ought to give a point of view and that we ought to sympathize with and do it, we'd be doing it.
Sure. At
We'd
this
be out
point,
there.
it's not like people are excluding, um, I think that was, when I was asking the question, I was struggling to think of what an example would be, but like spiders and octopi are like perfect examples of just like beings that have their own intelligence that just like don't normally get counted on the same level of humanity for whatever reason.
So in Samuel Delaney's 1980s autobiography, Motion of Light in Water, He's
Hmm.
writing in the late 80s, I think it's 86, about his experience in the 60s as a gay black science fiction writer. And he says at one point, he says, you don't get people like me in fiction. And a friend of his who was into BDSM said, you do get people like me in fiction, but we're always the villains. You
Mm.
can only have somebody who's into BDSM in the 60s in a book as the psycho villain. And I think that we are expanding that so that that's no longer the case. And we're looking at more kinds of human cognition and mental ways that people can be
Mhm.
in empathetic ways. And that is something where there's been a lot of push recently in recent years. And a lot of people are saying, no, you can't have a character be like that and make them the bad guy without more nuance.
Hmm.
Who characters who could have unnuancedly and without any problem been the bad guy 10 years ago, even.
Mm.
So I think that's an area where that's happening.
Yeah.
On the topic of Samuel R. Delany, I once made an informal survey of my favorite authors, and I discovered that how highly I esteemed a writer's themes and prose directly correlated with how big of fans they were of Chip Delany. So both of you naturally ranked very high in both categories, and that has me ruminating about how important an author's writerly influences are on their later output. If a young person wants to be a skilled writer, I think we can all agree that the best reading advice is to read widely and voraciously. But if someone was just dipping their toes into genre literature, who should they be prioritizing on their reading lists? In short, which science fiction and fantasy authors do you think everyone should be reading for creative inspiration? Which authors do you wish would be read more often?
So I think there's a problem in asking the question, if you're just dipping your toes, what should you be reading for creative inspiration? Because you
Sure.
should not just be dipping your toes if you're reading for creative inspiration. Those are two very different
Yeah.
kinds of engagement.
I agree with that, but I'm just asking for the hypothetical person who's like, I want to write fantasy. I have only read, you know, Lord of the Rings, and
Yeah, I mean,
like
there
what should
there
I
was a
try to look for
survey.
next?
There was a newspaper poll done in Ireland about 15 years ago that was just demographically polling people about everything. Do you own a car? How far do you live from work, etc. One of the questions was, do you write poetry? One of the questions was, do you read poetry? Substantially more people said yes to do you write poetry than to do you read poetry. And a challenge that the genre especially faces is that a lot of people consume science fiction and fantasy stories via either video games, television, or film,
Hmm.
naturally want to reply by creating a story and response, and then turn to prose because one cannot by oneself sit down and create a film or a TV show or a video game in the same way, and will then try to produce in prose a response without consuming prose.
Definitely.
And as a result, we'll have really interesting ideas often, but struggle at the structural questions of how to make a story have beats, how to make the thing advance. To which the answer is read some stuff, any stuff.
I
Read in the
read
medium, right? Read in the medium you intend to produce in.
I look at a lot of amateur fantasy writing, and I find like a pretty consistent flaw is they're like, like I'm writing fantasy, like this is my power system. And it's like, this isn't really fantasy. This is
Right.
shonen anime, right? This is just like replicating the tropes of shonen anime because that is the main thing that is being uh like consumed, right? And as a result, it's what's being exported, even though it's like, well, it's like if you want to be reading fantasy, you should be trying to if you want to write fantasy, you should be reading fantasy and so forth, right?
Yeah. So
Well, and
so
more specifically, if you want to write books, you should be reading
Yes.
books,
yeah.
which is a a simpler, broader step. But if you consume in audiovisual media and then try to produce prose, you're not going to have skill at producing prose.
Hmm.
Yeah. If I'm faced with a specific person who says, "What should I read? I've only played video games," or "I've only read Lord of the Rings," like your example, I would ask them what they like, and then I would
Mm.
recommend specific things that are like the things they like, only better, or more diverse, or more interesting, and that will be a step from where they are to help them get towards having a broader reading. I've recommended in recent years that a lot of people read Sophia Samatar. Uh,
Oh, okay. That's she
um,
did Alondra, right?
yeah, that's right, Stranger in Alondria, but also she's written some really great short stories. And Isabel Kim and Theodora Goss, who are all writing right now and are writing on an interestingly different edges of fantasy.
Mm.
And then there are a lot of classic fantasy things that I would recommend to people. And I keep raving about Daniel Abraham's Long Price Quartet,
Yeah.
Okay.
where the
I have the first two long price quartets,
right.
and I am still trying to find the other two
You
books.
should you should totally worth it, yeah,
Yes.
because those books are doing something genuinely different and genuinely interesting
Hmm.
while still being centrally fantasy and really great. And so there's loads and loads of things that I might recommend to a person depending what they'd read. I might say go read Hope Murley's Blood in the Mist and
Of
Paul
course.
Anderson's The Broken Sword. Go to the pre-Tolkien great things and see what you can do. If it was somebody who loved poetry and things that are poetic, I might recommend Greer Gilman, who's got a third book coming out really
Wait,
soon.
what?
Yeah,
Seriously?
Yes.
really, yeah.
Yes.
The
Oh my God.
sequel standalone in the world novel coming out. It's finished. She's got a publisher. It's wonderful.
So I have like Moonrise on my very short-term TBR, and now I think I
Right.
might need to speed it up even
Yeah,
faster. We're
yeah.
getting our first new Cameron Reed novel in 30 years. We're
And
getting
it's
a new.
so good. It
Oh, I'm
is so
excited.
good. You're gonna love it. If Terra Ignota is your favorite thing ever, you're gonna love What We Are Seeking. It's another grown-up novel. It's also like Terra Ignota. It's a wonderfully traditional science fiction novel, like the science fiction that's always been written, but
Hmm.
with a sensibility that it could not have been written any time before now. And I love that in a book. That combo of having read the earlier things, building on the earlier things, reaching back to sort of Bester and early science fiction, but going forward from it and using
Yeah.
what we've really got now. It's great.
Another again, this is deeper than dip your toe, right? So if someone says, "What should I read?" The first step
Yeah.
is, "What do you
Maybe
like?"
you can just
Recommend.
forget
Yeah,
the
yeah, no,
dip your
no, it's
toe
fine.
framing. Just recommend
Yeah, yeah.
whatever. I
No,
I just
the
want to
first
hear
step
all of
is, "What
it.
do you like?" Let's recommend things that are like what you like,
Yeah,
but that are doing.
Yes.
Another thing that I think is very important when people really want to seriously create an entry in the genre and respond to the conversation is to make sure you've sampled the conversation over time and that you're
Hmm.
not reading only stuff that's brand new or only stuff that's golden age or only those
exactly.
two. So one thing you can do, especially if you've already read, let's say 5 or 10 fantasy novels that you like, that were like the stuff you like, is to take your birth year and look at the World Fantasy or Hugo finalists
Yeah,
for every
Oh yeah.
decade that ends in the same digit and pick the one that seems neatest and read that so that you're making sure you're checking in with the history of the genre once a decade to see what it's up to and what's changed.
Yeah.
And some of those books you might not like, and some of them you might not even finish, but you'll realize how the conversation has advanced. Because one problem you sometimes get in both science fiction and fantasy is somebody who's using a piece of the furniture, but doing the 101 level of something that the genre
Yeah.
has been at this for a while. We've already
Yes.
we've already explored a whole lot of stuff. You should be doing the 303 level of this.
Yeah.
It would be so cool.
Yes.
You don't need to do the basic level of this.
What if the knight was a girl? Yeah. Samora Pierce did this
Yes.
a little while ago.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a few years ago, I read the first issue of a debut American comic book that was doing, what if there were a robot girlfriend?
Whoa. No one's
That would
ever read
create
Chobits before.
awkward social moments and awkward power dynamics and make the main character who has the robot girlfriend think about whether this was a responsible or irresponsible relationship, as if no one had ever written a robot girlfriend story before. And I was like, can I introduce you to 300,000 robot girlfriend stories that have done the interest? And he was doing interesting, serious examination of it that would have been really sophisticated in 1966.
Right.
But I would love to see that same author look at the things that have happened since and then get to do the more in-depth. I can skip over these basics and jump straight to this.
The birth year decade thing is a really great idea. And also you can use my History of the Hugo books to find these books.
Yes.
But if you were to do that and you were to read 10 books, that wouldn't be a terribly onerous thing to ask somebody to do.
Right. It's not saying you have to know the whole history. It's taste each decade once or twice.
And if
Yes.
you said that to somebody and they said, oh, I couldn't possibly read 10 books, one from each decade of the last 100 years, they are not really somebody who wants to be a writer.
Yes, exactly. So this next question of mine is aimed towards Jo. I was pretty shocked to learn that your work did not find print in the United Kingdom until the release of Among Others. Especially since all of your earlier work had such heavy British themes and motifs like Arthuriana and King's Peace, Victorian Society and Mores and Tooth and Claw, Blitz and the Small Change trilogy, etc. As someone who has significant experience with fantasy fandom on both sides of the Atlantic, would you say that Brits and Americans have different priorities in terms of what they enjoy in their genre literature and what ends up getting published? And if so, what would those differences be?
I don't think it's that at all. I think it
Hmm.
is British publishers think they know what people like. And what they think people like is things that are very ironic and cynical, basically.
And cold.
And cold, yes. And
Maybe
I
kind of like
used
the KJ Parker, Tom Holt.
I actually love
Or
KJ Parker, but I know more like China Mieville.
oh, sure.
Right? Uh,
Charlie Strauss.
Charlie Stross, China Mieville, La Vita Da, people like that. And indeed, Alistair Reynolds and Adrian Tchaikovsky. There's a lot of great people who are writing things that are a little bit cold and a little bit detached and a little bit laughing at the reader.
Hmm.
I don't want you to care, a little distanced. And or indeed they do want you to care, but they're sort of ironic. They're sort of carefully
Yes.
ironic. And that is the tone that British publishers think the British people want to read. And they may or may not be right. They were not right about me, but also I emigrated. And I used to work part-time in a science fiction bookstore in Lancaster in northwest England.
Hmm.
And I knew what was being published in the UK. I knew what was being published in Interzone. We also imported books. I knew what was being published in the US. I knew what was being published in the US magazines. I knew that what I was writing and what I wanted to write did not fit into the British market in any way,
Hmm.
whereas there was a space for it in the US market. Lois McMaster Bujold has not been published in the UK since Comar. That is the
Wow,
last of the
really?
books that had a British release. I was only published in Britain with, among others, and I am no longer published in Britain. I was published in Britain for a very short little time. I am way more published in France and Germany and Spain than I am in the UK. I'm just not writing things that fit in the space that is what the editors and publishers there think that they want. And you'll notice they did publish Terra Ignota, which is big idea science fiction. And if I
Mhm.
was writing big idea science fiction, they might be more interested. It's not that nobody is publishing any women, but fewer women are being published in the UK
Mm.
than elsewhere. And the ones who are being published tend to be writing this same kind of ironic kind of thing. And some of them are great, but within this sort of narrow bandwidth.
But I mean, there's an association culturally between cynicism, irony, criticism, and being intelligent and prudent, right?
Yes.
When movie reviewers give more bad reviews, they are taken more seriously than when movie reviewers give a lot of good reviews, because the
Mhm.
negativity and criticism is associated with intelligence and prudence. Enthusiasm and warmth and passion are associated with naivete and foolishness. You get this in the rhetoric that's fashionable in journalism. You get this in the rhetoric that's fashionable in review writing. This is true on both sides of the pond. It is more true in British media than in American media. And when
Yeah.
you read just the tone of an op-ed in a British newspaper, the degree of cynicism and irony and coldness is on average higher than in the US, even though there's plenty of irony and
Yeah.
cynicism and coldness in a lot of US journalism. And so the expectations around that crafted taste, the taste of, oh, science fiction readers want smart books. Smart books are cold and judgmental, is stronger in the UK, not as a characteristic of UK science fiction, but of UK journalistic voice.
Yeah.
Sure. This is a bit of a light question, though it brings in the idea of the 710 list from Terra Ignota. For anyone who's watching this who might not have read Terra Ignota, would you care to explain what that is, Ada?
So it's an annual newspaper thing in this imagined world in which once a year all the top newspapers, and in fact other newspapers, but people may pay most attention to the top ones, list who they think are the 10 most powerful and influential people in the world. And it gets journalistic discussion and coverage in the same way that Time Magazine's Person of the Year gets discussion and journalistic coverage. And it's called a 710 list because inevitably the top 7 will be the leaders of these big 7 political groups. So those are always predictable. And the question is, in what order will they be? Will people think that Group A is now more powerful or less powerful than Group B? Will there have been shuffling among those leaders? So the top 7 will be the same 7 in a different order. And then the extra 3 at the bottom will be much more unpredictable, and different newspapers will make a point of picking somebody unexpected or different, or how they're ordered is more surprising. There's betting on it. But the idea of it is that it is a purely journalistic exercise that all the newspapers in the world do on a particular day that then gets a lot of reflection in the same way that people think about the Nobel Peace Prize winner, or think about the Times Person of the Year, or 30 Under 30, or these other journalistic listings of celebrityness, right?
One of the joys of Terra Ignota is I think you get the whole table of the 710 lists pretty early, like chapter 3 or 4, and it is like so dense with like names and factions that you're like, oh God, what am I doing here? And then like slowly throughout the book, you like digest all of these different characters and factions, and then by
Yep.
the end you can like flip back and then you understand perfectly like how all of these different like newspapers like their political standpoints um just by how they are ranking these different figures. But anyway, the reason why I bring up the 710 list is I think that it just makes for a very fun question format, which I don't know if anyone has asked you before. But anyway, I just want to say to both of you, what would be your 7-10 list of best gelato flavors?
Oh,
We're both
You don't
bracing
have to list
have
10
it
or
be
even
authors
Yeah.
seven
of our
flavors.
oh,
So I have very particular tastes in that I have the opposite of a sweet tooth.
Oh,
So
interesting.
I like the very tart flavors, and most of my favorite gelato flavors are therefore flavors many people dislike because they are so tart. But my top gelato flavors are red currant sorbet, sour cherry sorbet, pomegranate sorbet, sour mandarin sorbet, um, watermelon sorbet, which is less tart and is really fabulous. Frutti di Bosco, which is a mixture of berries with red currant, but also blackberries and blueberries and so on within it. How many is that? Is that
5, I
five?
think, yeah.
Yeah. So many of those are distinct and unusual that some people would just never, I would never recommend some of those to most people. A good solid red currant gelato is so sour and so acidic that if you have 2 scoops of it, you can get blisters on your tongue.
You probably
She
have
said,
difficulty
having done
finding
this.
a lot of those flavors in the United States.
So
You
Like,
can't find most of these flavors in the United States. You have to
yeah.
either buy a
Oh,
gelato machine
yeah.
and get the fruits from a farmer's market and make them yourself,
Oh,
or go to
wow.
Italy.
Do you have
Um,
a gelato machine? I
I
didn't
do
know
have
that
We,
was like a
we
consumer good.
both
both
separately have gelato machines
Oh
in
my
our
God.
houses.
What the heck?
Just the little, the little
If
household.
you're gonna live in North America,
You
what are you
need a
gonna do? You
gelato.
know?
How
I
much is a
also
gelato
love.
machine? I'm now like debating, like what my
About three
finances for the
hundred
next
dollars,
couple of.
but
Yeah.
Oh.
it's so worth it.
I'm a great fan of an unusual flavor, which is olive oil gelato,
Oh yeah.
where instead of
Mm.
a couple tablespoons of cream to chemically stabilize the mixture, you're using olive oil. So milk with a little bit of olive oil that gives very interesting flavor. One time when I was at the International Gelato Championship, at in Florence, where you get to taste all the competing flavors, there was one gelato booth that made 6 batches of olive oil gelato with the same recipe, but different olive oils from different parts of Italy. And it was
Oh.
so amazing tasting the rich, almost nutty, almost peppery
Mm.
subtleties in each of them. Right.
I guess this is kind of a dumb question, but it makes sense now that I'm thinking about it. Is there an extensive sort of sommelier culture for olive oil where it's like the different
Yes.
soil
Yeah.
compositions
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
lead to
Yep.
different qualities of olives?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Uh,
How much volcanic soil is there? How old are the trees? It's a whole thing. And for anyone who's listening to this who wants good olive oil, the tidbit that Americans need to understand is that the pasteurization requirements for importing olive oil are such that if you get imported olive oil from Italy or Greece or Spain, it's been through a chemical process that greatly reduces its actual flavor. So it's
Oh.
better to get California oil because California oil has not been through that process that is only mandated for imported olive oil. So even though if you're in Italy, yes, the olive oil is better than California olive oil, but within America,
yep.
California olive oil is the best olive oil you can get in America.
However, if you're in Canada, you can get imported olive oil from Italy and Spain and Greece
That has not been
that has
made.
not gone through this process
Yeah.
And is good. So
Okay.
do that.
If someone wants to,
Don't buy California olive oil if you're in
yeah,
Canada, only if you're in the US.
yeah. But if you want an American olive oil recommendation, California Olive Ranch, very, very good American olive oil brand,
Yep.
reliably high quality flavor stuff. You
Mm.
can get a subscription to their eco
It's nice to do the porcini oil.
Oh yes, the Olive Tap.
Yeah.
The Olive Tap. They do the best flavored olive oils that I've found in the US. They do an extremely good porcini oil. They also do a staggeringly good tart tangerine balsamic vinegar.
I
Where
was
for
going
tart
to
tangerine,
ask,
think
like,
mandarin.
what are the typical flavorants you would find in a flavored olive oil?
Usually it's going to be either citrus or an herb like oregano.
Garlic,
Yeah,
black garlic.
but I usually only use
Yeah.
the porcini oil as a flavored oil, and that's more, I want a porcini thing. I don't use very many other flavored oils.
I once had a lemon one that was really good from them.
Yeah, from the Olive Tap.
From
Yeah,
Olive
that is
Tap,
great.
but the porcini oil is the only one I actually
Yeah.
go out of my way to get. Yeah.
Olive Tap is,
Full oil sometimes.
oh yeah, but that's a vehicle for truffle, not the
Yeah.
oil.
So my gelato answer on this, you still haven't done 10, in fact.
Well, yeah.
But my gelato answer is I believe in the gelato symphony.
Mm-hmm.
So I never just have one kind of gelato. Ada actually will. She will get an entire cup of red currant gelato.
Very rarely. I usually get fior di latte with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cut
But
it.
if I'm having one of these very sour ones, then I'm gonna have sweet things with that to make that work.
Yeah, the combination of multiple flavors and choosing things that go well together.
Yeah, exactly, to make the gelato symphony. So at any given time, which three things I put together depend on what there is. I love watermelon. I love fig. That's another of my very, very favorites. I love
So that would put a watermelon in the 7 part of the 7-10 list, since it's
absolutely,
mutually shared.
yeah, mutually shared. Yeah. But I also love creamy gelatos. I love stracciatella, which is fior di latte pure milk gelato.
So it's an unflavored just milk.
With they melt chocolate and they put it in it, and it freezes as it hits the gelato, so you've got little strands of chocolate in it.
So rather than chocolate chips, you have much thinner, elongated,
kind of like filaments of chocolate.
Yeah,
exactly. That therefore melt in your mouth more, and you taste the chocolate.
Yeah,
more.
I love that. And I love hazelnut. One of my absolute top favorites, which you also like, is the pinoli.
Yeah,
the pine nut. When you can find it, that's wonderful.
Pine nut gelato.
Yeah.
And the goat ricotta.
Yep. Goat ricotta with either fig, or the thing they recently had in Della Passera was goat ricotta with mandarin, which was almost like marmalade in the ricotta.
Yeah.
That was so good.
And then the alice.
Yeah, alice, which is mascarpone with chocolate sauce. I love that. And another thing that I will always get if someone's got it is pear. Pear is one of my super favorite. I really want that. I love Fruity di Bosco, so that would be a shared one.
And pinolo.
Yeah.
Pine nut.
Yeah.
Pine nut is scarce because they've gotten so expensive. And so few gelato places can afford to make it.
Once, it was in 2016, we were in Florence for one day. Ada was teaching in Rome, and we took the students to Florence for one day. That was the day that Perché No had macadamia nut gelato, and that's the only time I've ever seen that.
Really?
And it was so good. I went back and had it again. It was so amazingly great that would be up there as one of my great all-time gelato flavors, even though I had it twice, but it was on the same day. But I might not, if they had that, I would order it, or pinoli. But I might not order something that's one of my favorite things if there's something unusual that I want to have and it wouldn't go with it.
So like I love grapefruit gelato, but grapefruit only goes with very particular things.
Yeah, and I'm sure there is also this question with grapefruit gelato in particular about messing with medications, right? Isn't that the whole thing with grapefruit?
Yeah, depending. But even just flavor wise, you can't have grapefruit with pear.
No.
They do the weird grapefruit thing. You need to have grapefruit with lemon and ricotta or something.
When we were in Rome in 2022, it was November, and so there was chestnut gelato, which was great, but getting it to combine with anything that was in season, I tried so many things with chestnut. And there's a flavor that is called Baccio, which is chocolate hazelnut, sort of like Nutella
Hmm.
flavor, which I never normally would order, but it went with the chestnut and it made the chestnut go with the clementine or mandarin that they often had because it was November.
Mhm.
So that flavor of three things is very fondly remembered.
Well, I loved the days that they had both clementine and
Yeah,
mandarin at the same time, and you could taste the subtle differences
yeah.
between the different citrus variants. Oh,
But I did that and I got it with crema because I knew it wasn't going to go with the chestnut.
yeah.
And then it tasted like a creamsicle. Oh, sometimes you just really fail Gelato Symphony, but that is the joy of it.
Yeah, yeah.
And Ada once got three different flavors that were all white. So you couldn't tell in the cup what they were. It was yogurt, fior latte and lemon, I think.
No, lemon you can tell. It was yogurt fior latte and some pale nut flavor, but I forget which.
Right.
It might have been coconut.
And anyway, you could not tell visually that it wasn't just vanilla because it was all white.
Yeah, so fun.
I'm gonna go get some gelato after this call.
You shouldn't have asked us about gelato.
No, this question, I am. It went so well. It went even better than I imagined it would. This is exactly the type of symphony that I wanted to hear.
Well,
if you're ever in Florence, let us know. We will take you to the good gelato places.
Yep.
Yeah.
The other important thing, if you're going to go to an Italian gelateria to know is a lot of people ask, what should I get if I want vanilla? And there are three different answers
like the
that depend
default
on, well,
gelato.
there are three different answers which depend on why you want vanilla.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you want vanilla because you like the purity and simplicity and the fact that you can purely taste the milk and it's very light and simple, you want fior di latte, which is the unflavored pure milk gelato. If what you like is the rich, creamy, sort of French vanilla type vanillas that are often kind of yellow, right, and have that almost custardy edge, then what you want is crema, which is the egg custard gelato.
So good.
If what you like is that you really love vanilla, the flavor, and you would like a vanilla liqueur or a vanilla cookie, then you want vanilla gelato. But a lot of people who like vanilla ice cream order vanilla gelato and are like, I'm being kicked in the face by over-the-top vanilla liqueur flavor. They're not prepared for this is not vanilla. This is vanilla. It's very vanilla. And they're like, that's not what I wanted. I'm like, no, you wanted fior di latte or you wanted crema.
Yes, a person once described as if somebody took two vanilla pods and shoved them up his nose.
and for some people that's delightful, but for others, there's a variety of reasons people like vanilla ice cream. And so you have to ask yourself, if I want vanilla ice cream, which of these three reasons do I want it? And then there are three different correct answers.
If you want chocolate, if they have a chocolate sorbet, getting a chocolate sorbet with fior di latte is often nicer than getting a milk chocolate, if you like milk chocolate, or if you like normal chocolate ice cream.
Yeah.
That can work.
It's chocolatier.
It's chocolatier, yeah, exactly. And stracciatella is the chocolatiest of them all.
Even though it has less
even though it has less chocolate, it's just so chocolatey. Yeah.
What would be the kind of obviously the United States ice cream and custard culture has like vanilla and then chocolate and then strawberry as the three dominant flavors, and that's ironically called Neapolitan, even though I'm sure it's probably not actually representative of tastes in Naples whatsoever. So like what would you say are the kind of like the three, what would the average Italian person desire the
hazelnut
most?
and fior di latte.
Okay.
Yeah, and pistachio.
Yeah, pistachio is up there too, but it'll be either pistachio or hazelnut are the top
normal ones.
Flavors.
The things you'll always find somewhere.
Yeah.
And with fruit, it's very much what's in season.
Yeah.
And there are some things that are always in season, like lemons, and mangoes, because they're imported. They're never in season. So right now, in March, when no fruit is in season in Italy, you're often best off getting, this is a great time to have your banana and your lemon
and mango. Yeah.
Yeah, and
So
they've had
like you might as well
pomegranate.
import since there's
Right.
nothing
And the
natively
lemons
in
are always
season.
good. So
Yeah,
Yes.
lemon is reliable.
yeah,
But for fruits, you want to look for the fruit that is in season. And the trick to making sure that it's good quality is fruit gelato should be the color that fruit would be if you threw it on the ground and squished it. Right? Lemon gelato is white. It's not yellow. Banana gelato is an unappealing shade of gray,
Oh God.
right? It's
They
not
couldn't
yellow.
even
It
make
looks
it
like
the neon
mushed up,
orange circus peanut coloring.
right? But you'll go to gelato places where it is yellow, and you know that that gelato place is putting artificial stuff and additives into the gelato to make it be tourist colored instead of the color
Yes.
the fruit would be if you squashed it. Blackberry should be nearly black.
yeah,
Um, Blueberry should also be nearly black because it's got so much of the skins in it. Squashed up blueberries
Mm.
don't look like the color of the outside of a
yeah,
blueberry. They look very different. And so you can tell at a glance, aha, that gelateria has gray, unappealing looking banana. That means that their other flavors will be really good,
yeah,
right? You can just look in the window, see it, and say, I can trust this gelato place. If their banana looks like a sort of a whitish grayish smear, then their chocolate will be chocolatey, their nuts will be nutty, everything will be as it should be.
yeah.
Uh,
Even if
uh,
you're not going to order banana, look at the banana.
Yeah.
yeah, I went to Italy for the first time last fall. I was able to go to Rome for a week, and so it that constantly felt like the game is trying to identify like what are the signifiers of a place being too touristy. Um, because that definitely, especially in Rome, right? That
I mean,
seems like it's the constant
if the
struggle.
place is in Rome, it's already very touristy by
Mm,
virtue of being in
Yeah,
Rome, which has
sure.
been a majority tourist city since 700 BC.
I went to Rome for the day a couple of weeks ago, and I went into a cafe and I ordered a cup of tea and a freshly squeezed orange juice. And I just went in because I wanted to sit down, basically. And the waitress was surprised and delighted that I was ordering in proper Italian.
Mm,
And
Mm,
just simple Italian of asking for a cup of tea and orange juice, but knowing what gender they were.
right.
Because Rome just has that many more tourists than Florence,
Yeah.
uh,
Yep.
where people expect you to order in Italian. They'll understand you if you order in English, but it's in no way notable.
Yeah. But because it was an imperial capital and then a pilgrim capital and then a tourist capital, Rome has genuinely been majority foreigners and tourists for more than 2,000 years. We sort of think of tourism as a modern
Mhm.
industry, but Rome has been minority Roman for a very long time. And it's been minority Roman for longer than gelato has existed. So Rome's gelaterias have always been for tourists as well as for locals. The question is, can you find a quality one that is for tourists as well as locals?
Giolitti, go to Giolitti.
Yeah, if you're in the center.
And Otterleg if you're in Trastevere. That's
Yeah.
where I was trying to make the chestnut
Yeah,
gelato go with everything.
Gelato backwards, alto leg. Very, very good gelateria.
We should probably be getting towards winding up because
yeah.
you've got a meeting
Yeah.
in quarter of an hour.
Yeah, I guess I just want to quickly ask both of you about what's next for you. First, I will ask Joe, this summer your next novel will be published. Everybody's Perfect, a swashbuckling fantasy adventure set in a parallel realm to Renaissance Venice. I think that's kind of what I'm gathering from it. Based off the early marketing, comparing it to Ellen Kushner's Swords Point, this could be considered your first fantasy of manners novel since Tooth and Claw. When fantasy of manners was a subgenre at its peak in the 90s and early 2000s, authors like Ellen Kushner, Delia Sherman, Susanna Clarke, and yourself provided an important, feminine, and socially conscious counterweight to the stereotypically hypermasculine epic fantasy that dominated sales charts at the time. In 2026, where romantasy reigned supreme and women formed the majority of fantasy readers, do you think fantasy of manners is primed to have a major revival as a subgenre?
So, to answer that question, actually, I think it would be really neat if it did. I think that would be kind of cool. And there's some great Fantasy of Manners books, and I believe that I had a post on Tor.com in 2010 listing loads of fantasies of manners. And one that you might like is Barbara Hamley's Stranger at the Wedding. I love that book. But Everybody's Perfect is not, in fact, a fantasy of manners, and it is not, in
Hmm.
fact, swashbuckling either.
Okay. Again,
It's
that's the thing. I'm
no,
like
no,
this,
it's
the
fine.
basis of this question could totally be wrong. I'm
Yeah,
just using the comps. I
yes.
was using the comps as my guide.
The problem with my books is that they tend to not be like anything. So it's very
Yes.
difficult to say that it's like something, because it isn't. Everybody's Perfect is set in a world that is between worlds. It's like the wood between the worlds in Narnia and in William Morris, except that it is a sea world with a city in it that is like a shadow dream Venice that is
Mm.
between worlds, and it is between 9 worlds. One of them is our world, and the other 8 are different worlds with their own cultures and alieny people. This is fantasy. These people, these different peoples, have heads that look like Venetian masks, and this is not a coincidence. Venetian masks are based on what they look like. And if
Oh,
they go to
fun.
Venice, people think, oh, there's somebody wearing a familiar kind of Venetian mask. But when they are in their own worlds, that's just what their heads are like. And they have their own cultures and their own worlds. And the book is written in 9 parts with 9 points of view, one from each of these different worlds, and one from our world.
Oh,
But the
wow.
book is entirely set in the Serenissima, this dream Venice that is in this world that is not a world, but that is between worlds. And some people live there and are born there, and other people go there and are visitors or immigrants to this
Perhaps
city.
kind of a planescape vibe, maybe, of the city of Sigil.
Planescape is actually a lot closer than the idea of swashbuckling or fantasy of manners. No, you got those from what's on the back of the book, but it's hard for people to write the backs of my books.
Sure.
And it's got a great cover. I love the cover. The cover is really beautiful. And so it is a story that is like a relay race where the chunks of it pass from hand to hand, and you are following a person, and then the story will be handed over to another person when they are with that person, and you get another point of view, and it goes round. And I did this to make it easy for myself because I like writing beginnings. So this book is all beginning, um, and the plot moving through these points of view. It's kind of weird, but a lot of my books are kind of weird.
Yes.
And I think that if you like other books of mine, if you like more than one book of mine, you'll like this one as well. Also, people will like this who don't like any of my other books. There's always people who like just one book of mine, and it's kind of difficult for them. But I like writing things that are different. So that's coming out in June. It's called Everybody's Perfect. And I've just completed another novel, which will probably be out next year, which
Oh,
is called
wonderful.
Sunlit Uplands. It is a road trip novel. It is very, very political. It is set in any number of alternate 2020s. Um,
Oh,
in
perfect.
America. In America, it is my great American novel. And
Oh,
so
man.
so these 2 books themselves are super different from each other. Uh, and I always have this thing. Normally, when I write a book, I then write another book afterwards, and they're different from each other. So by the time a book of mine comes out, I'm like, oh, that old thing. Why are we talking about that old thing? But I'm actually at a point where I can sort of describe Everybody's Perfect, which is more than I could a year ago. Yeah,
Yeah, you did a good job.
thank you.
Oh, I am so that a wonderful pitch. I am so excited to read it when it drops.
Yeah.
And Ada, I am looking forward to Hearthfire, your upcoming duology about Norse mythology launching in 2027, more than anything else in the world, except for perhaps Everybody's Perfect.
No. It's so good. Loki in his prison. It's
Yeah,
so good. I've read it.
We've finally finalized the titles. Book 1 is going to be called "And Loki in His Prison." That's the
Oh, wow. Okay, that's completely different than the previous
Yep.
perspective title.
Yep. We discussed the
And
titles a lot and finally decided to go with one that was very clear, simple. It tells you what the book is about.
oh,
Good plot.
to say that again, it's And Loki in His Prison.
Yes. And the
Oh,
series title is Hanged God's Game.
oh man, the duology has a different title.
It will
Oh
always
man.
be Hearthfire in my heart. And if you think of it as Hearthfire, it will make sense all the way through the book. But
But like
it's
I
a
can
very
understand that
ungoogleable,
for
unclear word. And if you
yeah,
hear a
SEO
fantasy novel is
purposes,
called
Hearthfire leads to
yeah,
400 other things at this point.
right. And if you hear a
Um
fantasy novel is called Hearthfire, that fantasy novel could be about anything. But if you hear a fantasy novel is called And Loki in His Prison, it's pretty clear what that book is about.
Terra Ignota had rich intertextuality with literary works such as the Iliad, Jacques the Fatalist, and Book of the New Sun. I'm certain that Hanged God's Game will be a great read no matter how much familiarity the reader has with Norse myth. But for context-obsessed superfans such as myself, which books and sagas should we read in preparation for the duology?
So
Can
it
we expect any thematic intersection with Gene Wolfe's Wizard Knight?
so the Gene Wolfe, it's more like, though it isn't exactly like it, is actually Soldier of the Mist.
Oh, I just finished Soldier of the Mist like
Yeah.
3 months ago. So
Um, yeah, so Soldier of the Mist is doing Greek, but the degree of saturation and
Hmm.
the whole world being filled with the presence of the mythology. So it's more like Soldier of the Mist. Um, it, it's designed for and carefully tested on beta readers with a wide variety of levels of Norse myth, from none to Marvel to I grew up reading Dahler's Norse myths but haven't visited since, to I'm a Norse myth buff, to I did my PhD on runology, uh, to make sure that it works at all of those levels, which it does. And if you've pre-read a bunch of stuff, you will enjoy more richness. If you haven't, you'll have no trouble following what's happening. If you wanted to read things to start, I still think there's actually no better intro Norse myth book than Dahler's Norse Gods and Giants, which is now under the
Hmm.
new title, Dahler's Book of Norse Myths. It's a children's book, but it's really, really good, and it hardly
Is that
Baudelaire.
the
It
illustrated
Baudelarizes
one?
literally one word. Um, Yeah, and it changes the word testicle to the word hair in one myth. But other than that, it is exactly it is exactly and gives you a good introduction to all the books. If you want more detail, Caroline Larrington's Green Introduction to Northern Mythology, I think is what it's called, is a very good second level deep dive. If you want a really deep dive with history of the archaeology and how we come to know what we know about Norse myth, then you want Neil Price's The Viking Way. And if you want to read and enjoy primary source stuff, if you read Njál's saga before reading it, you will enjoy facets that intersect with Njál's saga. If you read the Volsunga saga or uh, Greenland's the Greenland saga, you'll recognize a few things. Just little ones here and there. You don't need to read these things. If you do, you'll get richness out of it. Knowing the prose and poetic eddas is always good, but you really need to know the myths first, because the way the myths are
Sure.
presented in the prose and poetic eddas are really opaque. So you always want to read something like Dahler's Norse Myths or Caroline Larrington's Introduction before you jump into incredibly fragmentary, confusing, anonymous things and Snorri contradicting himself all the time levels of stuff. But those would all enrich it, but are super optional. And you can jump in with nothing and be fine.
Music. The
Oh, and you
music.
can, listening to my music would enhance it a lot. And
Yes,
there are
it's called what?
intertextual
Sundown?
references. Yeah, so Sundown Whispers of Ragnarok. If you go to my website, it links through to the website, but there's a Bandcamp site where you can download the album I'm hopefully going to be doing a remastered version of the music that is aiming to come out when the book does. When the first book does. We'll see, knock bamboo, whether it whether it makes it particle board. But yeah, having the music in your mind would enhance it a lot. So if
Yeah,
you would
the music
enjoy
is
finding the name of the group is Sassafras with 2 S's, but there are other groups called that. So going to Bandcamp and searching for Sundown Whispers of Ragnarok or just Sundown and Ragnarok will get you there, or going to adapalmer.com and linking through. The songs are myths set to music or speculative point of view of the gods about the myths set to music. Then they enhance the experience of the book.
and it's really good. Honestly, not all that many people have read it yet, but I've read it.
I think
it's
everything
just
that the wider
amazing.
public knows comes from your like mini reviews that you've been posting every year, and everyone is like linking and relinking, and it's like Jo Walton said it's like another Edda. That's so exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has that intensity. It's very, very saturate with history and myth. It's hard to describe it other than if you've read other books about Norse mythology, this one probably has more Norse mythology in it. It just has a lot of Norse mythology in it. It's
And
very filled. It's a bad way to describe the book.
It's not the way to get people to read
I don't know.
a book, but no.
I don't know how to do it. I don't.
So it's got one of the most interesting points of view of anything that I've ever read.
And here's the thing, Terra Ignota already has one of the most interesting points of view ever written. And so if it's more, even more so, then that's incredible.
Terra Ignota has a very, very interesting point of view. Indeed, I agree. This has a very, very interesting point of view that I was extremely interested in and impressed by. It's great. And you'll just have to wait until next year, and then you'll love it.
It's on its way.
Yeah,
it's done.
Early 2027, right? That's the prospective
summer.
Vague.
I think it'll be June,
summer,
June or July.
All right, excellent. All right, well, thank you so much for sitting down with me today. Had a really lovely discussion. I learned everything I needed to know about gelato.
Yeah. And I'm glad you liked trace elements. Thank you for having us on.
Yeah, I recommend anyone at home who is like interested in like the project of science fiction and fantasy, you know, someone who likes to read, you know, Ursula Le Guin's or Chip Delaney's nonfiction, their essays would definitely get a lot out of. Oh, I should pull up the dang book. Would definitely,
and especially anybody who enjoys talking about science fiction fantasy with friends, because it's a book designed to give you tools and vocabulary for talking about, oh, here's a better way to articulate the thing I was trying to say before about why I liked this book or what this book was doing or why this book was different or why this book was like this other book.
I sometimes say about fandom that it's people who've taken the extra step. You can read the book without being in fandom. Read a book without being in fandom. But if you read a book and you want to talk to somebody about it, that's fandom. And if you read a book and you want to talk to somebody about it and you are in fandom, therefore, this is a book that you'll enjoy.
Yeah, and okay, I just want to say I like made the realization last night that the original title for this, integral to the plot, was a Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged reference, and I lost my complete mind that it's a quote from the classic 2007 YouTube video Merrick's Council of Evil. I was like,
we really wanted to call it that. They wouldn't let us. They let me call what makes this book so great, which is a fun, childish title, but they wouldn't let us call it.
They wouldn't get us to have our book title come from Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged. But Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged is a legitimate primary source worthy of analysis.
It is. Did you know that, like, the day your book came out, like Little Karibos had been having a little bit of financial struggles recently, so he started like a GoFundMe to like kind of help to stop his house being foreclosed.
Oh
And
no.
every millennial on the internet turned out, and he got like $160,000 within this last week, like saving
Good.
him financially. And that was just like such a heartwarming story. Like even now everyone's just like continuing to pitch in for, I get one of the cornerstones of millennial internet culture, right?
Yes.
um but anyway, I will let both of you go now. Once again, thank you so much. And to all of you at home, goodbye, I guess. All right, this is the part where I guess I'll figure out how to stop the recording properly.